Today's show is sponsored by Yafa Bay and her Spirit of Tepereth Metaphysical Marketplace, here to provide you and your naturally special gifts with guidance and support through your life's journey, providing you tools such as candles, incense, charms, jewelry, oils, crystals, and much more. Visit them at 1273 West Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, or online at spiritoftepereth.com. You can find all our sponsors' information in the show notes on our website. Now let's start the show.
The controversial group leader in charge, ADOS, or the American Descendants of Slavery. The controversial group ADOS, or the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS, the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS.
Welcome to the Articles of ADOS podcast, a weekly show where we bring you undiscussed news, articles, and information important to the American Descendants of Slavery, our friends, and our allies. This is episode 15. I'm your host, Lisa Todd, along with my co-host,
Daud Giazan. On today's show, we will share articles from The Moguldom Nation, News1.com, Truth in Media, The Jimmy Dore Show, The Daily Beast, Black Agenda Report, and Democracy Now! Later in the show, stay tuned for our main event, where we dive into and interview the article, The Disturbing Rise of Antisemitism Among Black Celebs.
Personality. Peace. Did you hear that?
What's that?
Our personalities are back.
Okay. Whatever they are.
So I like to pose a question that forces us once again to have personalities.
Okay, what questions do you have for us this week?
The question is, are we African? Some people on social media like to tell ADOS we are African and we were African before we were American. Does that make us Africans?
No, it doesn't make us African. I don't know an African language. Kiswahili I learned and even taught to my daughters so that we could connect with a future united Africa. We don't have that yet. But that's the most I've ventured into Africanness in terms of incorporating into my lives. But essentially, I would be imitating, ultimately, their behavior systems. It is not something that was innate to me because I wasn't nurtured into it culturally. So there are connections, of course, but no, having ancestors originating on the continent, as all human beings on the planet do, does not make us culturally or connective organically to the African continent. And I have to say the continent because I know exactly precisely where my ancestors came from. I haven't done that DNA thing that's also problematic in itself.
Yeah, and I think, when they use this, they're, we're self-identifying as American descendants of slavery. In the past, I've heard, people denying that their ancestors were African. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, they're going to remind us they're not saying this in a positive manner. They're saying it negatively. Yeah. Because they assume we think that we don't know who our ancestors are. Mm-hmm. Well, we know that our ancestors were African. Most of us blame it on the education system. And therefore, where we are from wasn't as important as where we are. Mm-hmm. And so where we are is in the middle of white domination, racism, as you call it. Mm-hmm. We are in the middle of a nation that we built that we're not benefiting from. Where we are is where most of us were born. You're American if you're here. If you're saying that and you're American, you're Pan-African, and you're saying that to remind us that our ancestors were African, which we know that, yet we still are ADOS. Mm-hmm. If you're saying that to us, I'm going to tell you, you're American, Pan-African. You're American. You were born here. Your culture is here. Trying to connect with your ancestral is what you're doing. That doesn't make you African. It makes you trying to connect with African. So there's a difference. There is a difference. And telling ADOS that we're African, like we don't know that we're already African, is I don't want to say rude. It's something different.
Well, it's an insult.
Well, is it? Well, see, when you say insult, then it's like, oh, okay, well, it's insult. You're insulted that you're being called African, that, you know, that's a part of your history. Why would your history be an insult to you?
It's an assault on our character as identifying as ADOS, as though doing so, we're negating or omitting our ancestral roots. In that sense, it's an insult, and they should be more respectful, as Yvette often points out, not to tread waters there, because this is sort of like the last time we had this discussion where you were seeking for a good comeback. Here's a great comeback. While most of our ancestors, not all, but most of our ancestors came by way of the enslavement trade, some of your ancestors got us here. Now, why don't you deal with that, like in the form of apologizing? I know of one Ghanaian king that has apologized for it a few years ago. There's probably others, I don't know. But more importantly, how about some restitution and reparations for your complicity, some of your ancestors' complicity in our current predicament? How about focus on that for a while?
Agreed. And that's why at this point, I just, going to say, and the feeling is always mutual. Whatever you're throwing at, if you're throwing an insult because we're establishing and making a demand to be self-interest as ADOS, then the feeling is always mutual. And then I'll give that, whatever you're giving me, I'm giving it right back to you. Although I can control myself when I'm online and just scroll past your ignorance. Sometimes, you got to let people know that they're ignorant.
Yeah. Catch the fire. If you're ADOS, an ally or friend, we encourage you to connect with a local ADOS chapter and help change your local politics. Our ADOS Ohio chapter in Columbus meets every fourth Sunday of the month. For more information on the time and location, visit adoscolumbus.org. Are you busy? Is the news coming so fast you can barely keep up? No worries. The Articles of ADOS podcast is here to help. Hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now, and we'll make sure you stay up to date on the news and information that affects you and your ADOS life. In today's Rapid News Reports, we have some articles that you may have missed, all in some way affect you and your ADOS life. Up first, we have...
Asked about Black Americans killed by police, Trump says, so are white people. Tagline, the president rejected the fact that Black people suffer disproportionately from police brutality and made startling remarks about the Confederate flag in a recent confrontation in St. Louis. Publication, The New York Times. Author, Jeremy W. Peters. Why are African Americans still dying at the hands of law enforcement in this country? The interviewer, Catherine Herridge of CBS News, asked the president, "What a terrible question to ask," Mr. Trump responded. So are white people. More white people, by the way. Statistics show that while more white Americans are killed by the police overall, people of color are killed at higher rates. A federal study that examined lethal force used by the police from 2009 to 2012 found that a majority of victims were white. But the victims were disproportionately Black. Black people had a fatality rate at the hands of police officers that was 2.8 times as high as that of white people. The president's remarks were the latest example of his refusal to acknowledge the racial discrimination that even many in his own party have said must be addressed. But Mr. Trump, who recently retweeted a video of a supporter shouting white power and said he would oppose a bipartisan effort in Congress to remove Confederate names from military bases, has displayed no intention of trying to bridge the country's racial divide. Asked in the CBS News interview how he felt about the use of the Confederate battle flag in public settings like NASCAR races, the president said, "With me, it's freedom of speech. Very simple. Like it, don't like it, it's freedom of speech." I graded this article good because we actually get to hear out of the horse's mouth his ignorant views on several controversial topics on race. He opened up his mouth and removed all doubt. Up next,
from the publication, Black Agenda Report, entitled Desperate Times, Desperate Measures, Dump the Democrats. Tagline, the Democrats are likely to put forward a black woman prosecutor to legitimize the mass incarceration plague that Joe Biden helped inflict on Black America. Writer Riba N. Team. Kamala Harris might be the perfect lens to reveal who the Democrats really are. A good rundown on her track record highlights her assertion that it's not progressive to be soft on crime. As a San Francisco social worker, I sat on the school district committee that met with families of chronically truant students. Once, when we asked a student why he didn't go to school, he said there was too much police tape and shootings at his school bus stop. Harris, as California Attorney General, was putting parents, caregivers in jail if their child was chronically truant. My recent article, Seize the Time or Face Fascism, elicited revealing comments such as, how do we seize the time? It must be incremental. Only the privileged, not the dispossessed, could still advocate for incremental change. Until we accept that the Democrats will never deliver, we will not look at alternatives and are likely to face fascism in the near future. So what are some alternatives? After the DNC cheated Bernie Sanders twice, many of his supporters launched the Movement for a People's Party. Polls show that a large majority of Americans want a major new party, support progressive policies, and want money out of politics. That means that it is both possible and necessary for us to build a corporate-free, progressive populist party. We need to take ourselves seriously. Fascism will not be the FBI coming to our door. It will not look like fascism under Hitler, Mussolini, or Franco, but it is coming. Are we ready? I graded this article fair. Good that it wisely identifies the slide Americans are being forced to endure since it was announced by the Princeton study that we no longer live in a representative democracy. Poor that the article bases the solutions to the hope of working with other white liberals to do what Bernie Sanders himself refused to do, instead of pursuing restorative policies directed at Black ADOS. And next,
corporate America is defunding journalism about racial justice with blacklists. From the publication The Moguldom Nation, author and writer Anne Brown. During the COVID-19 pandemic, digital media advertising has dropped significantly as companies have tried to avoid pasting advertisings next to stories on the virus. Now comes word that companies are using blacklists to block ads from news mentioning George Floyd, protests, and Black Lives Matter. And this while several of them have been touting their sensitivity to diversity, police abuse, and the BLM movement. Apparently in June, Target Corporation told a leading online news publisher not to run its ads in stories related to the Black Lives Matter movement, such as articles mentioning police brutality, victims such as Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and those with the word protests. Target, MTV, and other advertisers have compiled blacklists, and news publishers are arguing by doing so it punished media companies for covering important topics since they earn less money from content where ad blocking is used. In essence, corporate America is defunding journalism about racial justice with blacklists. It's defunding our journalism at a time when it's imperative for us to be the front lines doing this kind of work, Paul Wallace, Vice Media's Vice President for Global Revenue Products and Services, told the Wall Street Journal. Even though stories about Black Lives Matter were Vice's most popular news in June, those articles received ad prices 57% less than news about other topics because so many brands are aggressively avoiding placing ads in those articles, he said. The most frustrating part of all of this is that the brands that are sending this stuff are standing on a pedestal saying that they support Black Lives Matter. I graded this article good. It exposes two things. One, how propaganda, also known as advertising, is actually funding our media and how much they rely on it. And two, that these fake corporations say that they support Black Lives Matter, but privately defund that message. And up next,
from the publication Democracy Now!, COVID-stricken Mark Lamont Hill, new Floyd video shows familiar ritual of racist police terror. Writer Amy Goodman. In Minneapolis, newly released police body camera footage reveals devastating new details of George Floyd's killing on Memorial Day, showing that officers pulled a gun, swore at George Floyd to get out of the effing car as he wept and pleaded, "Please don't shoot me." The video also showed that medics did not appear to rush to Floyd's aid after they arrived on the scene. We discussed the latest developments in the case that sparked an ongoing national uprising against racism and police violence with Mark Lamont Hill, author of Nobody: Casualties of America's War on the Vulnerable, from Ferguson to Flint and beyond. Lamont Hill also discusses how he tested positive for COVID-19. I grade this broadcast good. Excellent that the public is getting more evidence that police immediately escalated the encounter, driving concerns in most circles that the cops on the scene, as well as paramedics, intended for the black ADOS man to die. Fair is Mark Lamont Hill's presentation as well as his new book, From Nobody to Vulnerable to Rebellious Areas of the Country, helping white America to think of everything else but black ADOS. He just may get back into their good graces yet for a prime gig. And next,
Letters to the Editor. With reparations, where should we draw the line? From the publication NWI Times. Author, writer, Lynn Graham Sherriville. I disagree with his strong support of reparations for the 400 years of enslavement statement. How about reparations for descendants of the Union soldiers who fought to end slavery? Or how about descendants of American Indians? Doesn't that sound a little absurd since there are no slaves or slave owners around? Just who would receive reparations? This country is a flawed nation, but I think it has redeemed itself in many ways since slavery times. I would suggest Mr. Carter read the weekly articles written by Professor Walter Williams, who makes a lot of sense. Robert Woodson is another black man who appears on TV regularly and is well worth listening to. I graded this article okay. I like to see how our fellow Americans feel about our reparations claim. I also would caution you, these black men that she's listening to ain't a friend of black people. And up next,
from the publication The Jimmy Dore Show, entitled Veteran Living a Nightmare Created by Joe Biden. Tagline: So here is a feel-good story from Joe Biden's America. Writer Brandon Mosley, cited by Jimmy Dore. A black disabled veteran sentenced to spend 16 months in prison for medical marijuana, Sean was wounded in Iraq. The 33-year-old veteran is disabled with a traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder from his service in Joe Biden's war in Iraq. He uses medical marijuana to calm his nightmares and soothe his back pain. His medical marijuana was prescribed and purchased in Arizona, where it became legal since 2011. While traveling through Alabama, a police officer approached Sean and his wife, Ibani, in their car at a gas station. The pills weren't in the original bottle, which the officer said constituted a felony. The couple were both charged and spent 6 days in jail, but that was just the beginning of their Alabama legal saga. Pickens County extradited Sean back to Alabama at a cost to the state of $4,345 that was added to the $3,833.40 he already owed in fines, fees, and court costs. Sean has been at the Pickens County Jail since early 2020. On April 28th, the judge revoked his probation and sentenced him to 60 months in the Alabama Department of Corrections. That's Joe Biden. Joe Biden wrote the goddamn crime bill. He's proud that he's in jail. Joe Biden's proud that that service member is in jail right now for marijuana. Don't let them tell you that this is Trump's America. This is America. This is your country. This is the broken system we live in. This is the world Joe Biden created. Thanks to Joe Biden, we have disabled veterans from the Iraq War. Thanks to Joe Biden, we have more prisons. Thanks to Joe Biden, we have an endless war on drugs. Thanks to Joe Biden, the state targets African American communities for profit. Biden and Obama oversaw the militarization of local police forces. Biden and Obama gave billions to the people taking away your house during an economic collapse. Biden and Obama gave the okay for police to crack the heads of peaceful protesters from coast to coast during Occupy Wall Street. Biden and Obama propped up the surveillance state to now serve the police state. And he and every other blue check mother on Twitter expects me to vote for him? I'm not voting for him. He's not going to save us. I'm going to oppose the system that Joe Biden set up, and I ain't going to wait until after November to do it. You know who's going to save us? We are. The only way out of this is that we have to stand together. We have to stand together. The system has failed. The system is collapsing. It's time for us to stand together in revolution. I graded this broadcast excellent. A must view and read the original article. And next.
Black Twitter slams Chance the Rapper for suggesting Kanye West as better president than Biden. From the publication newsone.com. Writer, News One staff. First, he posed the question, are you more pro-Biden or anti-Ye, and why? I get that you all want to reply that you're just trying to get Trump out, but in this hypothetical scenario where you're replacing Trump, can someone explain why Joe Biden would be better? Then, in another tweet, he wrote, I finally got the answer now. I understand. Y'all trust Biden more than y'all trust Ye. I think I understand why. I just don't feel the same way. Almost immediately, black leaders tried to call Chance in for insinuating that West would be a better president than Biden. Writer and political commentator Keith Boykin replied to Chance, writing, do your research, Chance. Kanye has already missed the deadline to appear on the ballot in several states. Even if he were the best candidate, which he is not, there is zero chance that he can be elected. Zero. Every tweet you post supporting Kanye only supports Trump. The damage, however, had already been done. Many people slammed Chance for bringing up West as a viable presidential candidate, calling it a distraction for an extremely important presidential race against Donald Trump. Kanye is an opinionated person and a successful businessman. Kanye is an opinionated person and a successful businessman. Try it again. Kanye is an opinionated person and a successful businessman with zero political experience, who proudly says he doesn't read or take advice. That's basically a description of Trump. And as we've seen with Trump, those aren't qualities that make someone worthy of being president, tweeted writer William Ketchum III. I graded this article worth a read. And up next.
From the publication Truth in Media, Why Face Masks Don't Work According to Science. Writer Ben Swan. Everybody has to be on some kind of team against everybody else. In this latest example is whether or not you are for wearing a face mask or you are against it. For those who are for it, say by not wearing a face mask, you're putting their life at risk and being selfish. On the other side, they say that by being forced to wear one, their freedom is being stolen from them. Believe it or not, there have been a number of studies that have been done over the past decade. A number of controlled studies have been done that looks at this very issue, whether or not wearing medical face masks with N95 respirators in them, and whether or not wearing cloth masks actually reduces the risk of a virus. What did each of these studies find? They found the very same things. Let's start with the most scientific and medically advanced mask, the N95 respirator mask. These controlled studies found from the study in 2019 among 2,862 randomized participants. 2,371 completed the study and accounted for 5,180 healthcare workers' seasons. Among outpatient healthcare personnel, N95 respirators versus medical masks as worn by participants in this trial resulted in no significant difference in the incidence of laboratory-confirmed influenza. Remember, over and over we've been told that you must wear a face mask when you go out, and these N95 respirator masks are obviously the very best thing to wear. The vast majority of people walking around with masks are wearing regular cloth masks. Well, in 2015, there was actually a study done, taking a look at medical masks versus just a cloth mask and whether or not wearing a cloth mask would protect against the spread of a virus. And what that study found in 2015 should alarm you. Not only does wearing a mask not prevent the spread of a virus, it actually can put you at greater risk for catching a virus. According to researchers, this study is a first RCT randomized controlled test of cloth masks, and the results caution against the use of cloth masks. This is an important finding to inform occupational health and safety. Moisture retention, reuse of cloth masks, and poor filtration may result in increased risk of infection. There's another danger to wearing these masks on a daily basis, especially if you're wearing it for several hours. When a person with a respiratory virus, they will expel some of that virus with each breath. But if you're wearing a mask, especially an N95 mask, you're breathing back in the virus every time you attempt to expel it. Now, as I say these things, there are those who are going to watch and are going to say that it's simply not true. You're not saying that based on scientific evidence. You are saying it because it's what you've been told over and over and over again in the media and by politicians and by these doctors who are in positions that are political positions, not in medical positions. And over, they're repeating this to you. And by the way, even the biggest doctor of them all in this country, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who keeps talking about this issue, referred to wearing a mask as mostly symbolic. So why are we being required to wear one? I graded this broadcast excellent. References to the studies discussed will be in the show notes and on our website. And that's it for this week's Rapid News. All articles featured will be posted on our Facebook group and in the show notes on our website.
Time now for the main event.
In this week's main event, we will interview the article from the Daily Beast titled The Disturbing Rise of Antisemitism Among Black Celebs. Tagline, Nick Cannon and Ice Cube promoting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, Diddy broadcasting Farrakhan, Antisemitism has no place in any anti-racist movement. Author Cassie DaCosta. Daud will ask the questions and I will give the answers.
First of all, it has long been established that the religion known as Judaism is not a race, in the strict sense that term has been used. Further, in the mentality of the 1930s, European-dominated opinion about European Jews were seen as a subhuman race, because biblically their origins and connections were known to be among the Black African Hamitic race, where Semites were and are the offspring of Greek and Roman invaders who copulated with native Africans that once dominated the region where today we erringly call the Middle East. That being said, what is the basis of your article, Ms. Cassie DaCosta?
Often we discuss conspiracy theories as if they are kooky yet benign tales spun by our neighbors, acquaintances, and even friends. But in America's current political and cultural configuration, prejudice combined with ignorance often masquerades as legitimate thought and leads to devastating outcomes. And in a society marked by incessant high-speed information and spin, anecdotal and instinctual bias becomes the basis of bad faith arguments about free speech and a marketplace of ideas. As much as social media has brought us smart thinking by typically marginalized voices, it's also allowed careless people with big platforms to speak more loudly. And without the immediate intervention of the wiser and better informed people who may or may not surround them.
Please, Mr. Costa, what is the point of this article, where you've featured a critique of prominent black men in the context of American popular resistance to the plight of black men and women brutally murdered by agents of the state? Please stay focused. Please explain.
Recently, big-name black entertainers like Ice Cube, Nick Cannon, Diddy, the Jacksons, Stephen and Deshaun, and even beloved black author Alice Walker has spouted age-old anti-Semitic talking points, usually by quoting known bigot Louis Farrakhan, and locating black liberation is anti-Jewish suspicion.
European, white, descended elites own a vast majority of American agribusiness. For generations, black farmers have been marginalized, have had their farms stolen, and recently a white-owned and controlled company has been caught selling seeds to the remaining black farmers that were designated to self-destruct. All the above actions benefited white elites in agribusiness. Over 20 years ago, Oprah made a truthful yet flippant remark about the destructive properties of meat eating. Meat industry executives sued her. Not a peep from Oprah on that matter since, by the way. None of those meat industry executives were wearing African braids, or even the then popular cornrows. Ultimately, those who own and control whole industries are groups who have interests, whether they be racially based or religiously based. Time magazine said the same about Mormons a decade ago. Identifying their particular rise to power positions in America, or are you claiming this does not exist, and to draw attention to groups who see themselves as a group and who dominate various industries as being conspiracy theorists? Please make this make sense.
On his podcast, Cannon spoke to fellow anti-Semitic conspiracist Professor Griff, formerly of Public Enemies. He was kicked out of the group for his anti-Jewishness, specifically for calling Jews wicked, agreeing with Griff's racist view that Jewish people control media and claiming that Semitic people are black people, so black people cannot be anti-Semitic.
Mr. Costa, have you ever heard of the Jimba people of Southern Africa? The Discovery Channel and National Geographic featured them as descendants of the Jews who fled Jerusalem after the Roman slaughter of the innocents in 70 AD. They tracked them by way of DNA. Their findings included that while the majority of Jews fled southward into Inner Africa, with some traveling northward, many also traveled to Western Africa. Are you aware of this?
No.
Please continue.
After Cannon was dropped by Viacom CBS for his comments.
Mr. Costa, can't help but notice in your article you never identify that Viacom CBS may be dominated by a certain group that could have taken offense of Mr. Cannon's statements. So rashly they did so without an investigation. Now they could have been motivated due to making it clear to the public that they are concerned about controversial topics aimed at any group. Yet Viacom CBS were very direct in how they identified Mr. Cannon's words, were they not?
Diddy then took to Instagram and invited Cannon to his network, Revolt TV. On July 4th, Diddy's Revolt TV broadcast a speech by Farrakhan, a man who has praised Hitler and repeatedly calls Jews satanic worldwide, and also shared a Farrakhan video on Twitter in which the Nation of Islam leader called the Jewish head of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, Satan, and claimed that those of you that say you are the Jews, I will not even give you the honor of calling you a Jew. You are not a Jew. You are Satan, and it is my job now to pull the cover off of Satan so that every Muslim, when he sees Satan, picks up a stone as we do in Mecca.
Very fiery implications. Yet while your article is entitled The Disturbing Rise of Antisemitism Among Black Celebs, the quotes of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan you've just quoted were from decades ago. Also, I connect Mr. Combs offering a platform to both Mr. Cannon and Minister Farrakhan as anti-Semitic, even if what's been claimed about them is true, in no way is equivalent to Rush Limbaugh's multiple decades of radio broadcast reign. Fox News, that has popularized anti-black sentiments for decades, a network that has clearly been shown to openly lie to the public. Yet you think it's appropriate to address these marginalized men, most of whom have been saying controversial things of all kinds for decades, then connecting their old stances to the current movement of black ADOS justice? I've got to ask, were you given this assignment to derail American popular support for the black ADOS current struggle?
No.
Well, I just have to disagree. However, continue.
The rapper and actor Ice Cube, for his part, has shared a series of anti-Semitic memes, and even lobbed an anti-Semitic trope at Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for denouncing anti-Semitism in a Hollywood Reporter op-ed, accusing him of accepting the 30 pieces of silver in exchange for the column. It's difficult to make sense of the smoke and mirrors anti-Semitism that emanates from Farrakhan, who feels he gets to decide who the real Jews are, and then leverage any critique amongst Jewish-led institutions he doesn't like on the basis of a Jewish identity he refuses to recognize.
Minister Farrakhan and others, some of them European Jewish writers, have cited documented sources for their stances, much of whom were written by European Jewish sources. Is it possible that it is difficult for you to make sense because you are unaware not only of biblical history, DNA research I cited earlier, as well as American government's COINTELPRO program? None of this gives you any pause whatsoever in writing this article. Out of ignorance on these matters, what are your thoughts?
This is not too different from the criminals Trump claims are crossing the border from Mexico in droves. Demonizing characterizations and willful erasure allow racist ideas to haphazardly take the form of concern. In the same way, Cannon denies that what he is saying is anti-Semitic because the only Semitic people he recognizes are black people.
On that matter, history, reveals that many in Europe converted to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam at various times and for various reasons. It can be shown that many European groups converted either way in order to avoid hostile environments they found themselves in. Yet, to claim that identifying those who converted and who've caused a variety of harms as anti-Semitic only serves to limit thought and justice on such documented matters, don't you think?
What's more is that the crafted incoherence of these ideas make them easy to gloss over or outright ignore. Anti-Black and anti-Jewish racism are not interchangeable realities, but they are related and feed upon each other, undermining the liberation of Black and Jewish people, and of course Black Jewish people alike.
Since the 1980s, when American Jews were largely accepted as white, their status in America has grown significantly, with a majority of their group's political stances being rather conservative. Of course, there have been exceptions to this since the 1980s. Yet how is it possible you are not aware of this? For example, in recent years, there's been a resurgence of anti-Black violence, some of them culminating in the return of lynchings with a rope or multiple bullets. Please cite where this has been a common phenomenon among the American Jewish community by agents of the state who've been minimally penalized when killing Blacks. How is there a shared course of liberation, you say, for both Blacks and American Jews? Where does that exist, and what does that look like?
Like anti-Black racism, anti-Jewish racism cannot have a place in any legitimate anti-racist liberation movement. Yet, unfortunately, like with anti-Black racism, those who spout anti-Jewish ideas refuse to acknowledge their prejudice, instead qualifying their hateful words with claims to good intentions.
There you go again, Mr. Costa. Current movement leaders and leadership of street protests due to the outright and barbaric murders of Black ADOS human beings are nowhere and in any form or fashion saying these things. I'll ask again, because you didn't respond earlier. Were you approached to fashion in the minds of the public, largely your white subscribers to the Daily Beast, that the movement to bringing justice to current state-sanctioned murders of innocent Black Americans is filled with anti-Semites? Make this make any sense, please, unless there are in fact ulterior and propaganda-generated reasons to bring forth such a baseless concern.
It's easy to center the self, particularly when the self can serve as an avatar for an entire diaspora. But part of the freedom work means imagining well outside of and beyond the self, persistently being in community with others committed to similar work.
Platitudes, just like former President Obama would verbally tap dance instead of answering the question. Come on, Mr. Costa. Will you please answer the question directly?
When Black celebrities claim that their anti-Semitism is actually a pro-Black stance, they assert that the only possible form of liberation for Black people is through creating our own other.
Which, if this false argument you're pushing was even true, we collectively lack the wealth and social status in this society to bring your conspiracy theory even a modicum of validity. Isn't that right, Mr. Costa?
There is a huge difference between critiquing whiteness, a racist fabrication with undeniable social consequences, and denigrating Jewishness. Anti-Black racism as well as anti-Arab racism, as practiced by Jewish institutions and individuals out to be critiqued, were observed.
Yet your group doesn't own or control or have unfettered access to the media distribution, etc. When critiquing Jewish institutions and individuals for their wrongdoings, how can one make attempts to correct all of the categories you've just cited without hindrance, or in this case, the whitelash label of being anti-Semitic? If there is a way, please explain.
But on the basis of white assimilation and imperialism, not on the basis of Jewish identity, scapegoating Jewish people rather than challenging harmful institutions formed and led by people of any identity, plays directly by the fascist rulebook.
Okay, Mr. Costa, at the risk of you appearing anti-white, anti-Semitic, anti-Arab, anti-Asian, or even anti-Black, shout out to you, former owner of BET, which groups are the fascists with this rulebook? Or is that just one of your conspiracy theories?
But conspiracy theories often serve as a salve to incurious and unresilient people. Even as the greatest conspiracy of all, racism, hides in plain sight, and it finds its way to even those of us directly harmed by its systemic manifestations.
Please, Mr. Costa, where is your article on that? Wonder how much distribution that got. Bet not even half what this article on dangerous black men is getting.
Like anti-black and transphobic violence, anti-Semitic hate crimes have undeniably been on the rise since Trump's inauguration.
Unequivocally perpetrated by high-status yet lower-caste whites. Are you now suggesting that the black gentlemen you've chosen to focus on in this article are in line with those murderers? Or current movement and protest organizers are trying to appeal to them? Really?
A viable counter to the bad and dangerous ideas that fuel this violence is deeper and more rigorous reading. Rather than latching onto charismatic figures and cultural idols, we ought to get used to researching beyond YouTube videos, Google able quotes, and Instagram reading lists. We need to engage less in forums filled with fearful people and step out into spaces of accountability and vulnerability. What would it mean to invest in a liberation movement that isn't ego-driven or self-centering, but expansive and legion-gathering? How do we state our commitment to black liberation without falling back on lazy and harmful thinking? Perhaps we still look to confuse people like Ice Cube and Diddy because so many of us have refused to read, share, and discuss the vital work of critical thinkers like Angela Davis and Noel Ignatieff.
I definitely agree with you on that, Mr. Costa. You need to do a lot more reading, as well as increase your awareness as to how you are being used by the very white domination racist system that you also condemn. Yet I won't call you anti-white for doing so. At the same time, DaCosta, who you? Well, that completes this interview, listeners. You can read this full article on our website in this week's show notes. Coming up, we have the commentary on this article. Did we like it? Did we hate it? Stay tuned.
We want to take the time to give our friends and listeners a shout out. Thank you for clicking that subscribe button and for liking and sharing the podcast. You can also continue supporting the show by joining our Patreon, where you can receive exclusive content and promotional items for as little as $3 a month. Sponsoring the show will ensure that we can continue to bring you the news and information important to your ADOS life. So head on over and join us at patreon.com/articles of ADOS. All right. What do we think of this article?
Hated it and hated her attempts to bridge what they've labeled anti-Semitism with the activities that white and black protesters are engaging in on the street.
Yeah, I glanced at this and I didn't get a chance to read, so I'm glad that you chose it as a main event so we can go dive deeper into what the article is saying. But it's the same old. I've heard it before. You're an anti-Semite if you criticize or point out anything or wrongdoings a Jewish person or a Jewish company or Jewish as a group. And like you pointed out in the article, that Jewish is not a race, which I thought it was. So I learned something today.
That's the effective propaganda.
Yeah, I learned something today. But even still, Jewish people are not without criticism. And they've made it a point in this world, in this climate, and in the past, since prior to Farrakhan. Farrakhan is their favorite target. But prior to Farrakhan, they were already doing wrongdoings. This is America. There was wrongdoings going on since the inception of America. Anybody that came after 1619 have also been a part of, what was it, the booze trade, the sex trade, the bootleg trade. What is it? The bootleg trade? Did I already say that? Because you are religious people does not mean you are not out here sinning and not out here doing wrong, theft. When it comes to pointing out Jewish people's wrongdoings, if you say anything about your wrongdoings, then you're labeled an anti-Semite. And no, we reject that. We reject you calling these celebrity men anti-Semite because they're they literally have firsthand knowledge of, they know who they have deals with. They know who they're signing their deals with. So they have firsthand knowledge on your wrongdoing as a group and as a people, and you are not above criticism. So I won't call them anti-Semite because they know firsthand of the people that they deal with.
I would like to draw attention to what this author did draw attention to by saying that there are valid critiques of
one sentence.
Yes, I know. And which made her whole thing weak. I myself viewed such a critique on 60 Minutes back in the late 80s, early 90s. I get my decades mixed up at this point. Well, was interviewed was George Soros and how he got his wealth. And one of the key ways he got his wealth is because his father was doing some unsavory things in Nazi Germany.
Finger snap.
So if someone should call that evil, if someone should say that's a work of Satan and be labeled an anti-Semitic for doing that, well, then where were the calls for the resignation of, I think it was Mike Wallace, who was doing that interview, asking very cogent, relevant, correct, and historically documented critiques of George Soros and his father. Now, people on the right will love anything negative on George Soros, and therefore that'll be colored. But, not much craziness came from the Jewish community, as I recall, when that aired. It was a valid question because many Jews did cooperate, just as we have black collaborators with white domination racism. These elements crop up everywhere. But I'm using that as an example to point out that critiques can be made, and people will be labeled something to the degree to which power is impacted by such critiques. And that's what she misses in this piece, because she talked about them having these platforms. They don't own those platforms. Farrakhan was kicked off Facebook. See, that's the hypocrisy.
Finger snap.
Here's the hypocrisy of this being even a challenge. These are basically Negroes spouting ideas, and I don't mean to diminish anybody, but they're Negroes spouting ideas with the fear that we'll act like white supremacists and then take revenge or be angry about it when there's no consistent documented evidence even displaying that happening on any large scale, such as what happened in Europe in the 1920s and 30s. No one in their right mind would make such an argument, but they would make an argument in the context of active propaganda to undermine black progress. Period. And that's how I see her in this piece being used. She's attempting to associate the past and somewhat current statements that have been labeled anti-Semitic with the movement. That's my biggest critique of what this lady has done. And if she were wiser, more knowledgeable, she would know better. But I think the editors who chose her for this assignment knew she would know better and would take off on this like a rose. They've analyzed people as groups, as they analyze individuals, and pick them in positions to do this very thing. Things just like this.
I like how you posed in the interview that maybe she's being used to die down the protest, die down the support of Black Lives Matter, die down the movement towards anti-Black police brutality and all things, and all those other types of things that have risen within after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, all worthy movements. Mm-hmm. She was brought in to, hey, let's put us, and even so to speak to Nick Cannon, taking the focus off that there's anti-Black racism going on. No, it's not really anti-Black racism going on. It's anti-Semitism going on because Black men have these views.
Exactly.
And I like how you did that in the interview.
She mentions Alice Walker, married to an American Jewish person who had been. Mm-hmm. And so she was wise not to continually refer to her throughout the rest of the piece, only mentioning that she may have crossed lines and made some people upset with some comments she made. I remember them vaguely, so I won't go into any detail about them. But she was wise not to stay long with her because I think on the face of it, those larger critiques were invalidated and whether or not she apologized or not. These are well thought out human beings. I even include Nick Cannon in that. The issue is it valid to take their individual critiques, valid or invalid as they may be, and connect that to the popular movement, which this article attempts to do? Absolutely no reason to do so other than to whittle away at the popularity that such movements are engendering in the nation. And that's the only reason for this. This was a propaganda piece, whether she realizes it or not, which she may not. This has been used to whittle away at some support, especially maybe even among the Jewish community, that are supportive of what we are doing. Blacks, whites, and other people, religions, all in between, are doing out there on the street. It's a way of subtly whittling away at that faction that may be supportive.
Yeah. She's saying, like, look, don't support them. Look how they think about you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, we see you.
It's a shame. So that's why I asked at the end, DaCosta, who you?
And I like that. Because really, with the name DaCosta, who are you?
It's worthy of being asked. And again, I'm not questioning her blackness. I'm questioning her lineage and therefore her connections with the information that I provided in my question.
Wait a minute. Is she black?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Young black sister. Looks to be in her 20s. And again, her age, they chose purposely. DaCosta, they chose purposely. I submit they chose purposely to do this writing.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Who are you?
So she can't be criticized because she's black.
Yeah, right.
And a feminist. Let's not take that out because I know she's feminist.
We just did a whole piece on you. You're being criticized today, ma'am. All right. Is there anything else on?
No, that's it.
All right. Well, that's it for today's commentary on our main event. Listeners, as usual, you can always find the article in our show notes on our website, articlesof80os.com.
Today in Serious Questions with Daud, that's me. I'll take a listener's question and give commentary on any topic, whether social, economic, cultural, or political. Serious questions get serious answers. Send your questions to daud@articlesof80os.com. Our question today comes from
me. I have a serious question for Daud. What's up with the inconsistencies with American kids going back to school? I can't pinpoint the angle or the plan. Is the goal to eliminate public school and the cost of educating our own kids? Or are they wanting to increase the numbers of deaths and therefore manufacturing consent for vaccines with our Or are they wanting to increase the numbers of deaths and therefore manufacturing consent for vaccines with our children being first to be required? What's going on?
Well, number one, we have to know that public education in America has always been a struggle, a constant struggle. More solidified and consistent by the 1950s, it was still a concern of the oligarchs in this country as to what could come out of more increasingly educated, lower class people. A lot of good things came of it, but also a lot of challenges to authority took place. So that's another reason why out of the 50s, you have the CIA conspiring to present the idea to limit thought, the term conspiracy theory. I just don't want to go off on that tangent. But for our children, I composed 7 reasons as to why the hyped crisis regarding the virus is being done to achieve specific ends. One of the things I left off, because I didn't want to overwhelm people, is what's happening to our children based on your question. Because elites in the society never appreciated or wanted the masses to be educated, what is happening now within the context of increasing automation? Well, the outmoded, especially since the 50s, the outmoded education system, that K through 12 system that we know was based on farmers, well, it was outmoded by the 50s because more Americans were not farming by that time. So why do they keep it? Well, one of the key reasons why they kept it, well, a few of the key reasons why they kept it was because of it engendered submission to authority, teacher leading a classroom. That engenders in a person who rises to adulthood a automatic respect for authority. So when things are confusing, like they are surrounding the virus, people tend to lead toward power or do what authorities tell them to do. This is learned in grade school, people. Another thing that happens, especially by the middle school and high school eras, is a value is grown for cliques. A clique is nothing more than a subset of a society. You see the cliques, you try to be associated with the cliques. You try to move in and out of, sometimes even avoid certain cliques. What does that engender as you mature into adulthood? An understanding of race and race classifications and racial hierarchy. So that's another reason why they kept those models engendered. At the same time, you still had elements of the society that had no value for public education for the reasons I gave earlier. And so you had disaster capitalism as experienced or expressed by Naomi Klein, shock doctrine, that when horrible things happen, that's when elites usually come in and fashion things the way they want them. Well, Katrina is a good launching point. We could start sooner, like the corruption of the charter school movement, which is no better than public schools. And that's been long determined, but they're still around. Why? Well, you have a disaster capitalism point where you have Katrina happen. What happened as a result? Move large segments of poor population out. Those who remain are segmented into charter schools, undermining the public school system. Black teachers there decimated by that. Not very much talked about. What happened to the Obama administration? With his friend Arnie Duncan, they transferred a lot of resources to charter schools, despite their poor track record. Doing so decimated places where blacks were already attending classes. Chicago was definitely hit by this. Large protests weren't covered by the media, by the way, in large numbers to their extent. What happened? You increased the likelihood that black children would end up in lower resourced, high concentrated black schools. That's not the problem in itself. The problem is the concentration. So you had usual classroom sizes growing as much as 30 children in a classroom. Well, what's going to happen as a result of that? You're going to have higher unsuccessful rates. I could have said that better. So all that was planned. So what do we plan now? What do these elites plan now as automation is coming more? We've seen and heard the reports of self-serving drive-thrus, places where people can go and not even see probably just one manager. Those are going to be growing in number in the future. And these people look 200 years. We know this. They look 200 years in the future. There's not going to be many bodies needed, human bodies needed to function on the service sector because automation is coming in. So what do you do with a population that still has the danger of being able to organize? Well, you have to limit their ability to see the importance of organizing, and that is to undermine areas where they meet and can connect and develop relationships and grow into organizations. The family structure has long been said has been under attack, where we have the divorce rates that we have, and we have the dysfunctions that people are having within the context of inequality. Mirror that, you have the rise of automation. You will not need people to be organized and socialized in a system where they're going to be atomized in automatically. So that's the reason why, that's one of the other reasons that I could have put an 8 out of my 7 reasons for the coronavirus hype. Now they're going to be implementing the stage of isolating us further in our educational processes that will separate us and live within the context of only intact families or organized family structures that will learn haphazardly through the various modes of profit-driven organizations that will service them. That's another goal of what they hated about the public school systems. It didn't foment profit. Well, here, they know automatically black children are disproportionately not connected. They know black families are disproportionately not connected. What's going to happen in that scenario? Well, either a lot of money's got to come from government to fill that need, or they're just going to be complaining, as we have been complaining about the lack of black involvement in the internet systems and the money to sustain such a system for families or individuals is only going to continue in this new scenario. So that means more black people are going to stand the likelihood of not being educated at all, or minimally so, as things become even more automated. So you think it's common for people with master's degrees not to have jobs because everything's moved toward the service sector, because globalization has taken major jobs out of the country to exploit labor elsewhere? Well, we're entering a new phase where a lot of people are going to just be left out of jobs, period. And this is another subtle way of saying and shifting education so that we'll be able to have a beachhead. And that's what I believe is happening now with this current crisis. It's going to be used to expand the charter school movement, but albeit through internet connection, and therefore reducing socialization capabilities among young people who will not grow up having those experiences. And therefore, when they need to meet together in the street to cooperate, to do things we're seeing people do today, the chances of likelihood those having a good takeoff and being sustainable are going to be minimized, because people will not have the ingrained associations in childhood with being able to socialize with other people.
I mean, yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I just was like, Trump is so adamant about kids getting back in school, more so than he was with people going back to work. And I just want to leave off with one thing that I saw on Facebook. And it says, schools cannot reopen unless teachers are willing to sacrifice their lives and parents are willing to sacrifice their children. Agree or not agree?
I don't agree on that. It's a false statement. It's based on a false illusion. Young people overwhelmingly have the immune systems to withstand what's coming, and that's already been proven. No one's talking about their deaths. They talk about it when they happen occasionally, and that's because their systems were already compromised. Boom, boom. So it's there to foment the hype that's been created around this to get people to conform to what they want. So I don't even know what Trump's thing is, and he's evidence that the elite don't always agree. They didn't agree all in Vietnam. So the elite don't always agree. That hopefully explains Trump, because there's a lot of money with Trump, who's interested in getting some businessmen benefiting from not having to suffer without ready people there. So there's that faction. But the majority faction, the people that run the media that's giving us these messages that are making him look like he's crazy, their goal is to atomize further the American public so they cannot cooperate and organize in future atrocities that are going to happen, because the inequality that's been accelerated now because of trillions being printed daily for white elites and their interests. Mm-hmm. That it's going to result in more inequality. So what's going to happen with more inequality? More people in desperate situations, more abuse, more all these things that make us dysfunctional. And here we are, we're legitimizing out of fear, because that's a great motivator, the continued separation of people, of children. They're more than likely going to be upper middle class people that are going to consistently benefit from atomized educational process, while the poor are going to be continually struggle even greater now with an additional deficit of not having social contact with their peers in order to foment a resistance against what's emerging.
All right. Well, I thank you for answering that serious question. Always, please, we encourage you to send your serious questions to Daud at articlesofADOS.
Daud at articles.
Daud at articlesofADOS.com. I was about to say ADOS Columbus.
See, that's what I was doing. I was doing that.
There you have it, family. Another week, another show. Thanks for joining us on the Articles of ADOS podcast. Make sure to visit our website, articlesofADOS.com, where you can join our mailing list, see the show notes for today's episode, and to leave us a voice message to be featured on the show.
Now that you're family, we'd love it if you'd like our Facebook page and join our private Articles of ADOS group. This is where you can connect with other listeners, give feedback, and share articles you would like us to discuss. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send us an email to listeners@articlesofados.com.
Be sure to tune in next Thursday for a new episode of Undiscussed News you may have missed. Until next time, family, stay safe, stay strong. Peace.